In today's news, nothing to hear, nothing to see. All is well with democracy, and the good guys are in charge. Our lead story of the evening involves an incident in South Boston, where...
Not attempt to adjust your equipment. We are in control. This is Sinister Mysteries. Tonight, we bring you another disturbing case from our files.
Enjoy the rest of the broadcast.
Good evening, everybody. Good evening, Craig.
Good evening.
I
thought this was.
Oh,
yeah. It's for the dad joke. I thought it was apropos for the session. I know it's apropos, everybody. Apropos. Yeah. It was one of those. It was the only Catholic, close to Catholic shirt that I have.
Apropos. Did they elect a new one yet?
No, the conclave starts Wednesday the 7th, and it's not gonna. Nothing's gonna never happens in the first ballots anyway, because everybody's it's all politics. So everybody's votes for themselves in the first one, and then the next ones when they start jockeying for who is God's chosen cardinal. So it's all church politics.
All right, so Sinister Mysteries taking us back to World War One. For those of you who sometimes wake up in the morning and say, "How the hell did we get here?" This is one of the the key ways. This also shows you how the needs of the few how the needs of the few outweigh the needs of the many. So I'm excited that we're doing this.
Yeah, I think, like, for me, and it was one of those, I was going to pose this question at some point in the show, but I'd ask everybody too. It's like, what do you think was probably the most sought after result of this treaty? Because like during the research, there was a few people that claimed like this was setting up World War II. No, this was not even on the radar. They weren't thinking of a set, preparing for another great battle. This was basically they were jockeying for positions, and stuff like that. And so that's one of the things I pose like to the audience, and like even you, it's just think it's like, what do you think was the greatest motivator to kick this off? I mean, what do you think was their ultimate like long-term goal? They sought like, this is going to be the thing that we're going to get out of this. So that was kind of like what I'd pose for everybody, because that was kind of one of my leading things when I was doing the research.
Having looked at this for probably 20 years, my thing is that it's really eerily similar to why we fought the Gulf War and what what Ukraine was about, and other things. Even all this foolish talk about the moon and Mars and mining asteroids and crap. I don't know if you have something. Charles, I would say in part you're right, Charles. But like in Risk or any of those games, location is only part of it, but what's there is. So anyway, let's dive in.
Yeah, because it was kind of like following the Charles, because even at that point, we really weren't out of the completely out of the colonial thing, because there was still the British Empire was still pretty was still in kind of there. I mean, they didn't have the naval force like they had before, but they still India, Southeast Asia, they still had all these things. So this wasn't really dividing up England's at the time, dividing up their assets. So I don't know if it would be completely just a colonial possession thing. This was almost just, for me, what kind of a thing, this almost was, they were installing for me like a framework for what would probably be close to what we have as the EU. Now, it's like, to me,
I don't.
Where I feel like this was like this is the framework where they were trying to establish like just like a hierarchical, ruling class, like how this is going to go. And it was just a matter of beating certain entities into submission, a la, the punishment of Germany.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of, that was kind of, a little bit of my, but I'd be curious to, see how those, what everybody starts saying. So yeah, just keep throwing comments. It's awesome.
I think those are all elements.
Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So there had been a pretty good period of peace in the world before Germany really started their saber rattling. But there was an arms race. So industrialization, weapons, that means the elite. That means a lot of money. There were arm makers in Britain. There were arm makers in Germany. I learned about a lot of this working on my latest escape room and the world of Sidney Riley, who they call the Ace of Spies, and the work that he was doing. Japan was an imperial power. Russia was on the brink of massive changes, which happened during World War I. Which was interesting. That really, if the Bolshevik Revolution hadn't happened, I think the outcome would have been the same, especially when America came into it. But what the world looked like would have probably been
that's kind of a cool thing. Is like, it's like this for everybody. This falls like kind of right into this thing, the treaty thing, too. Using that breakout point. So now, if the Bolshevik Revolution hadn't happened, I would almost make the case that America probably wouldn't have been as involved as they were, because really what brought us in, especially like World War II and in these things, was the need of, where basically, this was like the opportunity was there for kind of what's going on in modern times. You can see, land, resources, these things that wouldn't have been as big of play because the Russia entity would have been so big that it wouldn't have been, there wouldn't have been as much of that push eastward. There would have still been almost that block where we can't, even in Hitler's time, he wouldn't have been able to go as far as, what he did, because Russia would have been this powerhouse that wouldn't have been touched. And so, I mean, that'd be curious to see what your thoughts are. It's like whether or not you think that's, America would have been a little bit more of a backseat player in this still, where we've been an isolationist.
Well, Wilson would have loved that. Wilson resisted and resisted. Teddy Roosevelt was going absolutely crazy, just calling Wilson all kinds of names and all. But there were a couple of things. There was the Zimmerman telegram, where the ambassador to Mexico from Germany was basically saying to Mexico, hey, if you want your old territory back, all you have to do is come in the war for us, and kind of mess things up for America. So he was under pressure because of that. But then the Germans sank, they sank the Lusitania that had over 100 people on it. And we know to this day, tragedy is tragedy. But when Americans on foreign soil, so to speak, are involved, it becomes a much bigger tragedy. So there was that. And then they outright sank another 3 of our ships. So the way you framed it, I think, was really astute. The fact that, would we have gone in as heavily? I think Wilson was forced to go in. And I think, according to my research, really, he felt like he had to stake a claim to what was there. But was that governed by what was going on in Russia? Probably so. I think that's a real good point. What is Joe, Charles, some of our other scholars in the chat room? What are your guys' thoughts on that?
Yeah, because that's always been curious to me, because it was the same way. It's just like it almost just like the attacks on the American thing. I don't really. I've always been kind of under the mind where I think that there's a good chance that they got bad advice, or it was somebody on kind of like what we will call, from John Wick movies, the table, talk to these ones because it never made any sense. America wants to stay out. So why start sinking our ships? Why attack our shipping? Keep going after England, France, all these ones. The same. America was just like, we don't want any part of this. But Japan comes over and just full on, just annihilates Pearl Harbor, and which at that point, dude, you just woke up a giant. Now look what happened. Same way with these Axis and World War I, all these things. Why? And during the research, that was the thing that it was like my recurring thing. Why poke a bear that doesn't want to be involved? This is like a bear that's just staying away from you, like when you're hiking in the woods and you keep going up and poking it with a stick. I mean, it's like I couldn't figure out why they would keep coming up and just keep egging on, like, boom. And it almost felt like maybe it's like somebody was just getting bad advice. I mean, it was just they knew what if we could just get, like you said, we could just pressure Woodrow just to do it just enough. And so they're putting a bug in the ear of, like, kind of like the gossip thing. Hey, they're talking bad about you. You might want to go blow up a shit. And that's what got them to do it. And then all of a sudden, like, oh darn, America, yeah, I'm right there with you, buddy. Yeah, let's welcome to the party.
We've talked about 9/11. We got into Vietnam. The Romans came up with this wonderful thing, this wonderful dastardly thing that you need a pretext. That's how you do a war, even if you're anxious to get in it. Plus, as we're going to see tonight, there were drivers behind the presidency at this point. Presidents were already being handpicked. They were already being manipulated. We did a whole show on Musk and JP Morgan, and I have just gotten more and more increasingly fascinated with Morgan for some reasons that I'm going to talk about tonight. Charles is right, too. All the European royals were obviously frightened by what was happening. But it's very interesting because they were all related. The English had to make the difficult choice to not give sanctuary to the Tsar and his family, which is why they were still in Russia, because they were all related. So it was a really kind of sticky situation. But above all that relation, and that goes back to the 1600s, which I've been studying forever because of my pirate stuff, because it gave rise to the Glorious Revolution. It gave rise to the Quadruple Alliance. It gave rise to Queen Anne's War, which is also known as the War of Spanish Succession, because you have the Protestants on one side, you have the Catholics on the other, thanks to Henry VIII, getting pissed off at the Pope when he wanted to divorce Catherine. And they didn't want, France and Spain were such powerhouses that they didn't want a relation of King Louis, the Sun King, on the Spanish throne. So they fight this 13-year war over it. So there's this pattern that goes on for hundreds of years. Of course, America is the new kid on the block, but I do think that the robber barons, plus Teddy Roosevelt, who sometimes he really fought against them and sometimes he was right in the pocket with them. I don't know. But above all of it is the Triple Entente, which is France, Britain, and Russia. So, of course, when Russia has to go, sorry, guys, but we have all this internal strife, we got to leave. That was a huge blow. And then there was the Triple Alliance, which was Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. And fighting that had gone on for hundreds of years, and city-states and the, precarious kind of stuff. Of course, imperialism was a thing. It's been a thing forever. And this is where the competition for the colonies comes in, global dominance, especially Africa, especially Asia. Also so familiar, Craig. In America, they got in the game and they were like, okay, we're really going to focus on South America. We're really going to focus on Central America. But now, of course, with lithium and all that kind of thing, all of these different things are in play. We unseated some people in Africa over things like plutonium. But anyway, we'll concentrate at this time. And of course, you have all this. And this is the thing that gets me about the Treaty of Versailles. Germany is so uber nationalistic, so proud, so prideful, and these different areas, these different pockets in Europe, which we've seen, go through modern times, Serbia and so on and so forth. But the Balkans were in a special hotspot. Slavic nationalism versus Austro-Hungarian rule. It's like pot boilers everywhere. So while my guess is the Rothschilds, the robber barons were happy in some ways because oil had been discovered. So that's a huge part of it, Craig. Oil in the Middle East. Treaty of Versailles probably would have looked different. Wilson probably would have gotten his way if it wasn't recent discovery of huge amounts of oil in the Middle East at a time. You mentioned the British Navy at a time where Britain was going from steam into oil. So they're like, the only way we have this great modern Navy that we're capable of. So lots of parts and pieces into play going into it all.
Yeah, because I liken, because a lot of ones, I mean, this is one I knew quite a bit about it, but during this research is, because World War one of the big catalysts of it was the Archduke Ferdinand assassination.
Yeah.
And when he was assassinated, and one of the things that, especially that led up to, just with the Treaty of Versailles, is it dismantled that Austrian Hungary Empire was one of the allies. And so one of the things I was trying to find if this was like some of the if some of the dismantling, of this was done due to that assassination, if they were trying to ensure that this, kind of like what they did to Germany, where this was one, we're going to just try to dismantle the parties that are involved completely, just in what they didn't do. And tell me if I'm jumping the gun here, but I think that's part of the reason why I think if this, what's also known as the Paris Peace, conference, if this hadn't been as punitive, and if this hadn't been so, pointed at Germany, I don't think World War II would have broken out like it did.
Oh,
because the national pride of the German, thing was probably one of the biggest catalysts for the buildup, is because of what they did to punish this player. I mean, they broke up these other ones, but they didn't throw, the proverbial, sledgehammer to the heads of the people like they did in Germany.
Right. Yeah, I have lots of evidence to support that in my notes here tonight. That's and I've been saying that for 30 years. You don't take an ultra nationalistic, extremely proud people going back hundreds, thousands of years and cut them off at the knees and think that they're just going to go away. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how soon after, during the peace process, and how soon after some very smart people were coming out and saying that exact thing. So it becomes very interesting. And it also makes me think, in one particular case, that there were drivers in the backseat dictating what was good for them. But so the war
lasted. You are correct. Joseph Redmile is correct. He was like, my dad maintained that World War II was a continuation of World War I. Absolutely. Yeah, it was absolutely was caused, from World War I.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there was more work to be done, right? That's what, in 3 weeks on May 22nd, you and I are doing the Marshall Plan, right? So,
yep.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the French were particularly upset, but look at the devastation of France. I mean, this landed squarely on France. Devastation, their young men wiped out, the no man lands, all of that. I think that France had a much... I think, and France was really the one who declared the diktat. Like, the Germans showed up, they said, okay, let's negotiate. And the French said, screw you, we're not negotiating. You're done, or we're going to kick your ass. And if you're done, we're going to go off and we'll be in touch about what's going to happen. And I do sympathize with the French. I mean, it was devastating. It was devastating. Charles, we'll get to the League of Nations, but that's another piece that then leads to the Marshall Plan, which then leads to the UN and all of that kind of thing. So the armistice, so you're talking 20 million deaths. You're talking about a new horrific kind of warfare. You're talking about mustard gas. You're talking about more advanced artillery. You're talking about machine guns and but still sort of using Napoleonic tactics. I mean, tens to hundreds of thousands of young men dying for 10 feet of land that then a couple months later went back to the other people. It was an insanity. The world had gone completely insane.
Horses almost became endangered.
Yeah,
because of this war. I mean, that I don't. A lot of people didn't realize that so many horses died in this conflict that the horse almost became an endangered species.
Yeah, because Britain still had their cavalry units, and you charge on your horses into a machine gun nest. Who the hell wins? I mean, it's heartbreaking. Steven Spielberg's War Horse. That scene is devastating.
Oh yeah, you're just watching all these horses just get mowed down. I mean, it's just This war was horrific. It's like you said, you're basically the trenches. Like you said, you're moving feet at a time, and you're basically climbing over bodies. To just get to a trench, and then all of a sudden you lose that trench, and you're back to the trench you were just in. I mean, it's just barbaric.
Just nuts, and really insidious crap like building like fake trees that people were inside. I mean, it was nuts. And it really was the dawn of modern warfare. And this really was another way for the global elite to make money. Krupp, Mauser, so on and so forth. So yeah, there's there's so much packed into this. So the armistice is November 11th, 1918. Like I said, it was a dictate terms. You wait to hear. So all the big boys get together, the big four. So Woodrow Wilson is there. Of course, Teddy Roosevelt is totally emasculating him. Wilson has come up with these 14 points, including creating the League of Nations, which is going to create this new world order. The League of Nations was created. The United States never joined it. Henry Cabot Lodge, who was a huge ally of Teddy Roosevelt, rejected it out of hand. They said, this is a disaster, because the French and the British said, screw your 14 points. Screw your, when the U.S. Civil War ended, the North just wanted to patch things up. So they were very friendly. I mean, Appomattox was, it was tough as hell on Robert Lee, but they were fairly amicable, which is a good way to get past things and start, rebuilding. So Wilson, a lot of people called it idealistic. Like I said, Roosevelt was furious. And the United States never joined the League of Nations for the time that it existed because of all this. Now, Georges Clemenceau from France, called the Tiger, he was pissed, and they had reason to be pissed. Their country was decimated. And then you have David Lloyd George, the British Prime Minister, and he's on the end here. You just see his top hat there on the right. He was publicly very harsh. That's the game that he played. He said, we are going to make the Germans pay, and pay until they squeal. But privately, he was really worried about what enacting this treaty was going to do in the future. So, like I say, Craig, I was so surprised just how they knew. And of course, the Italians, and I laugh because this goes back hundreds of years to the Quadruple Alliance, to the War of Spanish Succession. Italy just wants their stuff back. Like, people's always taking stuff from Italy. Sicily had changed hand over and over and over and over and over again. And Italy just wants, what I want, what's coming to me, right? As Sally in the Peanuts say, I just want what's coming to me. I just want my fair share. And that was the Italians. That's what they were all about.
I was, for France, though, this is one of the things, too, is I was surprised they just, coming off of Napoleon. I mean, they just, massive deaths, through this thing. They tried the empire thing. It failed. They've been reduced to where they are. It was one of those things. I think part of my thing was so surprising was just how it's almost like they didn't learn. They didn't learn really any lessons. It was just like they were still in that mode of like, like power players. It's like you would think that after that one, that this as a nation, they would have just retreated in, because I mean, we're talking 2 generations removed from the Napoleon. And now they're looking at, their forefront, like we're trying, you're wanting to be one of the power players again. And it's just, I think that was, to me, was a kind of a surprise too, leading up to World War I, is just how involved France and England were in this thing too. I mean, England's always been, the provocateur for a lot of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, this is a great point. So Germany fully expected, I think more they were relying on. They were relying on the fact that Wilson was going to prevail. That the United States was one who came in sort of in the 11th hour, totally changed the tide, won the war, and that was going to count for something. That America was going to have some power at the table. And it really didn't turn out like they wanted, because France and Britain, again, wanted retribution. They wanted punishment. They didn't want reconciliation. So then the Germans get this thing. And Chancellor Philip Schneiderman says, "What hand will dare to sign this treaty? Death itself would be more welcome." They knew it. They knew, looking at it, what that was going to mean. That was from the onset, and they just didn't have any choice. The economist John Maynard Keynes resigned from the British delegation in protest and warned that the treaty would destroy Europe's economy. And he was a damn smart guy. But in 1919, he wrote, "The Treaty of Versailles was signed in a spirit of revenge, not reconciliation." So better out of their mouths than my mouth.
Well, that's kind of what, back to what Charles said about the colonization. I mean, that would be the thing where it was like a revenge. It was overly thing, because where you basically, where the German colony, states as it became League of Nations, the run. So it was basically it was a heavy-handed. It was almost putting the sole blame for something on this one entity. It's like, you guys are kind of responsible, but we're taking it out on them. I said just, I think what was it? 7 million people is how much Germany lost in the war.
Oh yeah,
was it 7?
I mean, the price was steep. Yeah,
and they end up losing. They end up taking away about, I want to say it was somewhere around 15, somewhere between like the 10-15% range, I think is what it was, of like the territory that they ended up losing, like pre-war Germany. That's how much they were reduced. So you can see now, here comes the whole thing of, the mustache standing up there yelling about, the revenge of getting back what was taken from us.
Yeah.
You can see this is starting to, like you said, you're highly proud people, and you're beating them down to the ground.
Right. 1919, British diplomat Harold Nicholson says, "We have made a terrible mistake." This is within a year, less than a year. And then Joe's father, French Marshal Ferdinand Foch, so a Frenchman who actually spoke up against it. "This is not a peace. It is an armistice for 20 years. And he hit it spot freaking on. 20 years from 1918 is 1930. Like, he was spot freaking on, a French marshal. Let's get into, so why did this happen? Let's get into the financial part of it, the backers, the money guys. Now, JP Morgan, we talked about him so much, Craig, and you can only do so much in the show. But if you back up 30 years from now, and this is the weird assest thing, but Tanya and I just watched this documentary, and it was stunning, because it's Ed Harris talking about the OK Corral and the Cowboy War, right? So the Earps and the Clampets, the Earps and the Clantons and all of that. And Ed Harris says, and this led directly to World War I, and, almost led to a second U.S. Civil War. So what was going on was the Rothschilds, of course, had had really probably caused the death of Lincoln. And they were very pissed at Lincoln because of Russia. The czars were probably killed because the Rothschilds were pissed because these countries, America and other countries, were standing up to the Rothschilds and being like, no, we don't want your bank. Like, we don't want your money. Like, stay out of our stuff. So a lot of this, was directly related to that. J.P. Morgan was extremely close with the Rothschilds. Sidney Riley went to the Rothschilds to get the money for Britain to outbid the French to get the oil contracts when oil was discovered in the Middle East. So you have Morgan and Rothschild. They're working hand in glove. Morgan in the 1880s, America was a huge credit risk. So much of this, Craig, is like, sounds familiar. America is this huge credit risk, and he wants to back the US dollar with silver. Silver's coming out of Arizona, out of these big mines, which is getting disrupted because the Earps and Holiday and the Clantons and the Cowboys and all are fighting. So Morgan wants this crap sorted out. What I found out in the process of that is he ran Chester A. Arthur, who was just a total waste, right? Chester A. Arthur only becomes president because Garfield is assassinated. Garfield's assassination might also be tied to the Rothschilds and the world banking operations. So Morgan puts in his guy, Grover Cleveland. Cleveland, Harrison, McKinley. McKinley gets popped. You got Teddy Roosevelt. So Morgan is behind all of this while he's building his empire. He helps finance the Allies, especially Britain and France. He sells war bonds. He facilitates loans. And you know what happened when everybody was in for the funeral in Rome of the Pope? There was that sit down. I think that's going to become an iconic picture of Trump and Zelensky sitting on those two chairs facing each other in that room and working out economic deals. Trump went in and worked out the deal, which is interesting. Where is BlackRock and all of that? Because they've had the reconstruction contracts for years.
Yeah, and that was what was interesting too, is because Macron, he wanted to come in and sit in on that thing. There was originally he had put a third chair in there, and Trump Zelensky had it taken away. So that part, that info is like with the handshake, where everybody's like the handshake stuff. No, that was actually the two of them telling him, "You're not part of this," and shoving him away. And that actually, there was some stuff behind it where there's the power. That's why Britain, France, all these ones were upset. It's because they were excluded from. It became one-on-one negotiation and left them out without being part of the thing. And so that got them upset. Yeah. So a lot of people were focused on, no, it was a handshake. No, it was actually both him and Zelensky saying, you're not part of this.
Yeah. Yeah. So that whole, you don't have the cards. I mean, so yeah, very interesting. It's all a thread, which is why we do this on Thursday night. So Rockefeller was another one, now super, super wealthy through Standard Oil, and oil becomes a strategic resource. So Rockefeller is suddenly a huge player. So it really matters who controls the oil fields in the Middle East. So that becomes a major. So to me, Craig, that's the major post-war objective. We're in an industrialized world that's going to need massive amounts of oil, and it's all sitting there. In order for it to work right, we got to carve up the board, which I'm excited to do the Marshall Plan on May 22nd.
Yeah, when that's like, being a cinephile, I know the same way too. It's Daniel Day-Lewis's line, about oil. I will drink your milkshake is actually what this thing was, a globalist thing. It's like, no, you don't understand. We don't care about your borders. We'll drill right on, we'll take it all from you. So you either play ball or we're going to take it anyway. I mean, that's literally, we will drink your milkshake. And so you can see how some of these ones, they really get bullied into just going along, because it's like, either you say yes or we're going to take it anyway. So it's like,
hey, that's West Virginia, horizontal drilling. You don't want to give us rights to your land. This guy gave us rights to our land, so we'll go down, and then we'll
2 miles over. We're gonna go right underneath you, hook right into it, and all of a sudden the thing that you thought you had is suddenly an empty hole, and it's just like.
So this is really the solidification of the global elite. This is really the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, the Morgans, and the British royals, who were involved less now than they are, as you'll see in the Marshall Plan, because of all the money during World War II. Right, some of the same dudes that were financing and invested heavily in Germany were playing both sides. This is also around the time that Albert Pike's letter comes out about the crafted wars through the Bavarian Illuminati. So it's of a piece. George V is really looking after the imperial interests. Again, it's especially the Middle East, for Britain to get back on top with a big navy, because remember, Teddy Roosevelt was Assistant Secretary of the Navy. Churchill, before he came so proud, he was Lord Admiral, Lord of the Admiralty. So these guys knew how important a naval power was, and so much of it hinged on the oil, but really all the machinery, all that stuff did.
When you say that was like with Charles talking about basically the trophies that the U.S. got after this treaty too.
Oh yeah, I think so.
And so you could see that would also kind of a little bit of a validation of that point of where the naval, superiority still. It's like who controls the seas still controls the world, and there's still there's still at that point to where a superior naval force is still the controlling factor.
It definitely is. It definitely is. And I see that a lot. I just finished a huge biography on Teddy Roosevelt, and I saw that so much, that ability to get ships to a place and park them offshore. But we've seen that. We've seen that a lot in the past 8 years, 6 years.
Panama Canal is the same way. It's like it's still in a way, who can control shipping, is like still, has, you still have a little bit that grip hold on the world. It's like if you have control of the shipping, you still have that power.
Yeah, and
you have that energy.
At this time too, Panama was at this time, a little prior. Cuba, the Philippines, which were either Charles or Joe, I think it was Charles, brought up. We acquired those, right? Teddy Roosevelt was Monroe Doctrine, man, and the whole world police. There's that great Nash cartoon of him straddling the world with his billy club. So he's in this too. You mentioned, let's get into the provisions now. Well, I do want to say the British Royals, though, were shaping post-war borders through colonial expansions justified by the mandates of the League of Nations. So this thing was built in order to provide mandates for colonialism. No wonder the U.S. did. U.S. doesn't ever want to be part of any treaty or any group, from the International Criminal Court to the Kyoto, Accords, all that kind of stuff. If it's bad for America, they don't want to be in it, and they knew that it would be.
You don't want to put yourself in a box to where you can't have the freedom to go where you want, and so it's kind of like isolationist to your advantage. Is pretty much what it is. It's not isolationist out of principle. It's more out of isolationist because it gives us advantage. That's why we want to be. That's why I said. That's why it doesn't matter what president's been. There's always been the talk. I mean, I think the closest thing we've got to something like that was that climate accord, that Paris one. We almost joined something that would have locked us into one of these things, like the League of Nations thing, and so we were close.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and that's that push-pull. So let's get into the provisions now. What exactly did this mean for Germany? And I think that everyone will see clearly how this led directly to World War. It basically handed Hitler all the ingredients that he needed. Craig, you mentioned a little bit ago that Germany had to declare that they were solely responsible for the war. They actually codified that. In the paperwork, it was Article 231, and it was called the War Guilt Clause. Like
you are responsible.
Yeah, they had to say it. Yeah, this was solely our fault. Reparations were 132 billion gold marks, which is about $400 billion today. So, a country that's lost 15% of its land. They took all their patents. They took all their.
They looted the country. Yeah.
I mean, just cripple. And how would you think for a second? And I already read some quotes. How could you think for a freaking second? This is what tells me, Craig, that there are larger forces at work here. When 2 + 2 doesn't equal 4, somebody's adding to the bucket. Or taking a lot from the bucket. Alsace-Lorraine is returned to France, seems reasonable. The Sark coalfields are administered now by the League of Nations. So resources, powering, coal. There you go. Overseas colonies are seized. We talked about a lot of this. Their army was capped at 100,000. That's not a lot of dudes for a fairly big country.
Yeah, and you can't. They couldn't conscript anybody, so they couldn't just they couldn't have it. They could have a minimalist navy. It's kind of there's a lot of kind of like, in a way, it's almost like what we did to Japan.
Yeah.
After World War II, where we just said this is all you're allowed. You can only have this. You can't do this. You can't do this. And like it was kind of what we did to Japan. It was kind of almost like we learned. Okay, well, if we do this, but we can't go this far. If we just ensure. And so I think if they hadn't done if they had done a no guilt clause, the guilt clause against Japan, we might have the same, we might have had World War III already.
Yep. Absolutely right, Joe. The Air Force was banned, and Craig said a limitation on the Navy, no submarines. The submarines are what, were so devastating. The Lusitania, the American ships that drew America into the Wall Street, no subs. The Rhineland was completely demilitarized, which was a very big deal for Germany. Then we have the big game, which is the precursor to the Marshall Plan. Austro-Hungarian, Ottoman, Russian, and German empires are disintegrated. What comes out of this is the Sykes-Picot Agreement, which divided the Ottoman Empire, and this was all about the oil. Is that what you were going to say, Craig, that this was about natural resources?
Yeah. It really was. Is because you could almost in a way kind of say what's going on currently, like what's the rare earth minerals in Ukraine. Yeah. This is almost kind of the same thing. That's like to the victor goes the spoils. They're basically, here's this thing. We have somebody who really can't make it either way. It's like on their own. So they're dependent, and it's, you kind of like, all right, well, give us this, we're going to divide this up. You're going to give this away. And that's kind of seems like what's going on right now is it's just being carved up to the higher powers.
Yeah. You don't have the cards.
Yeah. EU, the European Union, Britain, US, Russia, they're all just kind of, this is, BlackRock's, just waiting for the rebuild mode, so they can get in there and be involved in the construction part and rake in all that money.
Which was exactly what happened with Iraq and Afghanistan. I remember going to a meeting. I had pretty good access to the governor of West Virginia, who then became Senator Joe Manchin. Well, he was always Joe Manchin, but he was governor, then became senator. And he was talking to us about this stuff. And West Virginia was having a devil of a time getting wired for high-speed internet. This was 10 years ago, and a huge detriment to a state to not be able to do that. And he was saying, yet we're wiring every single house, in the Middle East with, in the war zones with these construction contracts. It's not right. So, I mean, there's a lot of echoes. Poland was formed, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, Finland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, all come out, formed with these new identities during this time. And of course, the British and French make huge gains in the Middle East, Iraq, Syria, Palestine, all about oil. But what happens, and we'll see it with the Marshall Plan, and you always have to go really delicately, even in this day and age. But when you create a state out of, people are there and they have ethnic heritage. And so when you create the state of Israel, you're going to piss people off. When you create this. Yeah.
Yeah. It was that same way, like you said, with Yugoslavia. You've created these things, these artificial lines, and we saw what happened. It's like it wasn't through World War II. It happened later under Clinton administration when when Bosnia, Serbia, when that went, it's the same thing. You forced people that aren't friends to be together, and then eventually it just you've got the pot boiling.
Yeah, it's kind of mind-boggling. It's, nothing is pure, because it's not, because there were larger forces that are working, who are meeting their needs, which are needs of control and consolidation. So for Germany, they have hyper inflation in the 1920s. It's been described that it took wheelbarrows of cash to buy bread. That went very badly. Anytime people got to stand online for a loaf of bread, they become very susceptible to suggestion.
And that's where the Weimar Republic, that's where it came into when we were doing the quantitative easing.
Yeah.
Quite a few years ago. That was where they were targeting. This is what happened to the Weimar Republic. It's like they became, due to the financial burden that was placed because of the treaty on this nation, they were trying to claw back out of this by doing these measures, and it ended up making the financial situation even worse and caused a massive financial collapse, which ended the Weimar Republic, which brings in hey, like they say, the rest is history. Is what happens.
Yeah.
And it's,
I think that people have to remember that the National Socialist Party legitimately won seats and won more seats and won more seats and won more seats. Hitler didn't, it wasn't a hostile takeover. It was all done, politically.
that's what it was. Is they were trying to claw their way out of this hole, that they were placed in, and it didn't work. It made it even worse.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things I think probably that was probably, to me, I think that was probably one of the bigger things that led to the rise of the socialists and Hitler. Was just like anything. It's like idealistically, everybody here listening, everything, we all have different priorities. We have different stuff. But what is one of the things that is the most imperative? You got to eat. You got to have this. You got to be able to pay for things. So now when you financially hit everybody and everybody's in the same boat, you can suddenly take these fractures and you've brought them together. And that's where, because people have always, it's that World War II has always been a fascinating for too, is one of those things like, how could something like this go so quick? Well, you have a vast population that's all under the same conditions. And it's real easy to say, if everybody's starving, I can give you bread. Boom, you have everybody's attention. And if you start delivering and actually bringing them bread, well, now everybody's following you. This is this is the thing. And people say, it's like, well, how could you do it? It's because he was actually doing the things he said he was going to do, and it was actually making everybody successful again, and everybody was just like, oh my God, I'm right there with you. And nobody ever questioned. They were just like, went along with it. And that's what just kept the ball going.
Absolutely. So you got unemployment, you got poverty, you have that humiliation. And I actually think that the humiliation was probably the worst of it for the German people, who are just so incredibly proud. It fed nationalist extremism. People band together. I mean, whether it's high school outcasts, it doesn't matter. If you band together, you become a force. That's how gangs, right? Gangs are,
they're tarred and feathered, starved, and then
yeah. Let's band together. Historian Margaret Macmillan now in 1919 says Versailles was the seedbed of Hitler's rise and the world's descent into a second world war. The seedbed, that's exactly right. You can say whatever you want to whoever. If they're not receptive to it, it doesn't matter. I don't give a crap how eloquent you are, how much of a cult of personality you are. People have to be receptive. That's the thing that I think people don't get about, take Joe Rogan, for example, right? If people didn't want to hear what he was saying, he'd have a tiny little podcast. He wouldn't have like a record breaking, like the biggest.
He wouldn't have millions of listens as soon as he puts an episode out. Yeah.
Now, good on him, because he knows exactly what to say to them. Hitler knew exactly what to say to these people, but the conditions were there. There's also the stab in the back myth. This really wouldn't, if things hadn't gotten so horrible, right? Because you got the Weimar Republic, which we've talked about, and you have the communists on the left, you got the Nazis and the Freikorps on the right, and they're squeezed the shit. And so as they were doing that, you need somebody to blame, right? Germany had to shoulder, through the war clause, Germany had to shoulder sole responsibility for this war. So of course you're going to turn around and you're going to pass that responsibility, what's happening to you, to someone else. And they chose the Jews, the communists, but especially, as we know, the Jews, and that's called the stab in the back myth, that they hadn't lost military Germany, that they were plenty strong militarily, that they got undercut and sold out by Jewish and communist politicians.
I think it's kind of, you can see it like just like what you said. I think because what it is once you get to the point to where, like, if you're starving, you can't, you're right there with them. But as you start to get fed, you start to become comfortable, complacency will start coming in. You don't have that outrage. So what do? You have to find a new enemy. You have to find a new thing to keep people, keep people fired up. And I think that's where it went to the extreme. It's like, especially with Hitler, when you start pointing at, these people, the education, that's like, that worked, the capitalists, that's the problem. And then it just became, the Jews are the ones that did this to us. And, and it was like a de-evolving of society, where it's like they kept finding, you got to find another person to blame. It's their fault. It's that, like you said, the stab in the back. This is the person that wronged you. This person wronged you. And then it just became, their entire identity was who wronged us. It was never about unity, about so I think it was always about going after the next person who I felt wronged me. And it just became a violent domino effect.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was terrible. It was terrible.
Yeah. And then really it becomes the secret handshake club, which gives the rise to Aryan purity and all of that. I mean, it just, once it got started, the people were shocked on the back end of it, how complicit they were. But people will do really interesting things when they're starving. Really interesting things when they're starving. Unpredictable things. So we heard a lot of quotes tonight, but we didn't hear one from Hitler. But he did blame the Treaty of Versailles for Germany's suffering when he wrote Mein Kampf. Yeah, so of course. And then he said, we're going to tear it up. We're remilitarizing the Rhineland. They had the Anschluss, the union with Austria, the Sudetenland annexation. That was those things that you took away from us unfairly. Fuck you. Yeah. We are taking them back.
Because you look at it, it's like, if you look at images, you think it's like, oh my God, they were so far apart. Horses, and now, like what you see in World War II. But if you think about it, we're talking less than 30 years.
Yeah.
I mean, this is, it's not hard to bring up, look what here, because, for everybody that doesn't know me, I always use Bob as a reference. Look at Bob. He's still hobbling over there from, what those allies did. He lost his leg. They took his home. They killed his farmland. They took away everything, all in the name of, calling us the guilt. It is like they could just point right here to these people, and it's still fresh in everybody's mind. So this wasn't like going to people today and saying, well, look what happened back in the 60s. Dude, I wasn't even alive. No, you can sit here and you could point. No, look, there's the person that you're at the cafe with. They were the ones that are punished. Don't you want justice for him? And it's like, boom, he fed and told them exactly what they needed to hear to keep them engaged. And that's, I mean, it's fast. It's one of those things you can do multiple episodes on just this period between World War I and World War II.
Yeah. No, yeah. I mean, it's key. It's key. And so then, they always talk about appeasement. Remember, David Lloyd George said, make them pay until they squeal publicly, but he was very, very nervous about this. John and Maynard Keynes resigned because he was very worried about it. Francis Marshall Polk Foch, said the same thing. This is a huge mistake. This is an armistice, a 20-year armistice. So Britain and France's appeasement was in part guilt over the Treaty of Versailles, knowing damn well that they had gone too far.
Too far. Yeah. They knew they could. That was like you said, a while ago. He could see what was coming. It's just like anything. It's like if you walk up to your neighbor and just punch him in the face, nothing happens right there. But over time, you can see the rage building in him. It's like you could see it coming. And so, you come over, you try to appease what, did. It's like, but at some point, the damage was done, and the fury just kept building and building. And like, yeah, you're right. They knew those appeasement things were trying to derail this freight train that was barreling down.
So that's what I got. That was a lot. And everybody has 3 weeks. Well, 2 weeks. Next week and the week after. Craig is doing some traveling, and I'm gonna launch a little new thing that I'll announce sometime during this week on social media. Next week I'm getting it together. Same brand, just slightly different focus for a little while. But
I got a scammer calling me. Do you want me to put him on the show?
We're coming. What's that?
I said I have a scammer calling me. Do you want me to put him on the show and see what they're calling to sell me?
Oh yeah, if you want to, I guess we got a couple minutes.
I don't know how I don't know if
it'll show up. Yeah, I don't know if it'll show up.
I don't know if it'll show up, but it'll sure be entertaining when they try to tell me my Social Security has been arrested by the FBI. Security police.
I practice my my accents and my characters when those people call, when I have time.
Oh, I know.
But my Google
I like
phone
messing with them
sometimes.
sometimes.
Good job of weeding them out. Yeah. Yeah. So the Marshall Plan. So you'll see now, this is sort of Treaty of Versailles Part 2. You have the Albert Pike stuff that comes out. The general who says, all these wars have been carefully engineered. I think it really was the thing, Craig, that they realized so much money could be made for war, and peace is sort of bad for business. Peace is bad for business.
Yeah, it's no, you're right. I think this is one of those ones where, especially with the Marshall Plan, it's like you can really see, this is where Eisenhower, the more that these things are brought up, these things are found out, you realize almost how brilliant Eisenhower was and brave he was to make the announcement of just the dangers. If you do not check these entities, what we're facing now is exactly what Eisenhower was warning us against.
Yeah.
And this is where they said this come in, is like they realized that, hey, why just be on one when we can be on all the sides, making all the monies, and we're just gonna let, like Charles, let the peons kill themselves. It's like, we don't care. I'm like, dude, just keep fighting. It's like, hey, oh, do you need another stick? Here you go. Oh, you need one too? Okay, here you go. And just keep giving, it's like your neighbors are feuding. Oh, Bob, here. No, seriously, quit with the sticks. Use this rock. This is a lot more effective. Yeah. And then, man, can you believe Bob threw that rock at you? Here's a rock for you.
Yeah.
It's just, yeah.
So I have a meeting I got to get to.
All right.
West Coast.
Thanks, everybody.
Everybody keep good thought. There's cool stuff going on. Craig, safe travels when you I don't know if you say that publicly when you're leaving, but
no, it's best for not to announce when you're going to be away from your home. But yes, we'll be flying. Yeah, we'll be flying. No, for a wedding, but yeah, it's one of those. Next time we talk, we will most likely have a new pope in place. We'll see how that goes. And it's like, and as always, it's basically, it's been a pleasure and honor talking with everybody. I'm glad everybody stayed, and it's just, thanks for all the comments. It's great. Look forward to your guys' thoughts on the Marshall Plan, but don't be sinister, but stay mysterious.
There you go. All right. Good night, everybody.
Do you have a sinister mystery in mind? Let us know by sending us a DM or comment in the chat. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Till next time, stay mysterious.